Sometimes, even though we carefully develop a plan to achieve our goals, we get stopped. We run into a barrier that prohibits all further progress. Fear. Often it's a fear that we consciously know is unreasonable, yet we remain stuck. On this cassette, you'll learn how to remove these barriers. NLP Comprehensive trainers Tim Halbum and Susie Smith will guide you through a series of amazing processes that remove fears, traumas, and other negative experiences from your past, so you can get on with your present and get the most out of your future. Tim and Susie are the co-founders of Western States Training Associates, through which they've taught NLP techniques to thousands. They are authors, consultants, and psychotherapists, and both are involved in organizational training and development. They're about to show you proven techniques for banishing fears and building self-confidence.
Hi, my name is Tim Halbum.
And I'm Susie Smith.
We're going to talk to you about some very powerful abilities for replacing fears, or even the lack of self-confidence, with the ability to take action. Abilities that you already have, but perhaps haven't yet tapped.
William James, the father of modern psychology, said, "The greatest discovery of our age is that by changing our inner attitudes, we change all the outer aspects of our lives." In NLP, we say, the map is not the territory. What you see drawn on a map is not what you see in the actual countryside. The map of New York doesn't look much like New York when you're in the middle of Manhattan staring up at the skyscrapers.
Feelings come from how you think about people, events, circumstances, or things, not the people, events, circumstances, and things themselves. The methods on this tape will teach you how to literally take new perspectives. Perspectives on memories and experiences that have caused you to feel fearful, phobic, or uptight. You'll learn how to become more self-confident, resourceful, and effective.
Let's give you some experience by doing a mental exercise. As with all the exercises in this program, be sure to set aside a time to give the ones on this cassette your full attention.
Imagine that you're lying on your back on a lounge chair at a swimming pool. Your hands are resting behind your head, and you can feel the warmth of the sun on your cheeks. As you look over at the high diving board, you can see someone jump off and then splash into the water. As you watch them climb up and jump off again, you realize that it's really yourself that you're watching. Actually see yourself. Watch yourself jump again and notice what kinds of feelings you have.
It feels pretty neutral, doesn't it?
Now imagine that you're in the movie instead of just watching it. Imagine grasping the bars on either side of the ladder, looking up at the top, seeing the diving board in front of you. Notice how the metal rungs feel cool on your feet as you climb. As you reach the top, your whole perspective has changed, hasn't it? You're looking down at the water from the top of a tall ladder. Walk out to the end of the flimsy board and feel how it wobbles. Look at the water below you. Now, step off and feel your body sensations as you splash down into the water.
Notice how your feelings are very different when you're actually doing something as opposed to being an observer to yourself. When you're the observer, you feel detached. When you're the jumper, you get all the feelings of jumping and can feel the movement and exhilaration.
What happens when people are worried about or afraid of some situation or thing is that they invariably imagine the frightening situation and then step into it and experience it as though it's actually happening. However, when they imagine the same situation but watch themselves, they will have only the feelings of the observer.
So you can watch yourself have any unpleasant experience and handle it without fear, as long as you remain a detached observer. Connie Ray Andreas, senior NLP trainer and co-author of the NLP book Heart of the Mind, was working with a woman who was petrified of public speaking. Connie Ray got her to notice the internal picture she was making when she felt fearful. She was imagining being surrounded by people with giant critical eyes as she gave her presentation. When Connie Ray had the woman detach and watch herself, all her scared feelings disappeared. She then could see that her audience was just a normal group of people. She literally took a different point of view.
People have been talking about points of view for centuries. However, most people have thought about them as being metaphorical rather than literal. You can literally view something from any point in space. Each different point of view will give you somewhat different feelings. The most profound changes, however, are when you look at yourself versus looking out of your own eyes at any given situation.
When you look at yourself, it's called dissociation. When you look from your own point of view, it's called association.
Your posture helps drive these different mental states of dissociation and association.
Try this exercise. Sit in a straight back chair about 4 or 5 inches from the back of the chair. Just sit back comfortably. As you do, just let your eyes relax and defocus. Let your chin rise slightly. Now notice how this posture, this physiology, begins to change the perspective that you take on the world. Notice the feeling of detachment that goes with this posture. This is the physiology of dissociation.
It's very useful to recognize dissociation in others when you're communicating with them. When people are dissociated, they're apt to be analyzing the experience and thinking about what's going on rather than being involved in it.
Now try this. Scoot back in the chair so that your lower back is touching the chair and then lean forward slightly. Looking around in both directions, imagine what you would need to do with your body in order to catch a ball if it were tossed to you. Your physiology is more in the situation, and you're more with it.
This is called an associated physiology. Notice that when other people are adopting this kind of physiology, they are more fully engaged in whatever is going on. Your physiology can have a lot to do with your ability to either associate or dissociate. When doing any of the processes or techniques that we're suggesting on this tape, you want to adopt the appropriate physiology for each step of the technique.
Let's do another experiment. Think of 2 memories from your past, one that's pleasant and one that's unpleasant. Take a minute to re-experience those memories in whatever way that you naturally do. Notice how you recall those experiences. Are you reliving them? Or are you watching yourself? Or somehow observing the experience? When you relive an experience, it's said to be an associated experience. When you watch yourself, it's called a dissociated experience.
Whichever way you recalled those memories naturally, go back and reverse them. So if in the unpleasant one you were dissociated, associate in and notice that you can get all your feelings back.
That one's not much fun.
If you were associated in the memory, step back out of your body and see yourself dissociated.
Notice how the charge goes out of that memory when you do that.
Now, switch how you recalled the pleasant memory. If you're dissociated in the pleasant memory, step into it and experience it like it's happening now.
That helps you get back the pleasant feelings.
If you were associated in the pleasant memory, step out for a moment and see what it's like to watch it. And having gone through this experience, how do you want to remember things? Think about people who get depressed. They're often people who dissociate from their positive experiences and associate into the negative ones.
You may know people who are on an emotional roller coaster. They're up 1 minute and down the next. These are the folks that often associate into almost all of their experiences, and for whom dissociation is a rare experience.
Ideally, if you want to enjoy life, you'll associate into your positive memories and dissociate from your negative ones. You won't lose any information, so you can still learn from your mistakes.
To teach your brain this process, take a little time and picture several of your unpleasant memories, dissociated. To increase the dissociation, you can move those memory pictures farther away from you. Notice how moving them changes your emotional response to them. You should feel more detached from those memories.
If you have trouble dissociating from your negative experience, imagine that you're looking at it through a thick piece of plexiglass. This will allow you to separate yourself from the experience enough to recall the information without having negative feelings. You'll still remember any important learnings.
On the other hand, you can run through a series of pleasant experiences, taking the time to fully associate into each one. This will give you a way to enjoy your pleasant experiences more fully.
If you practice this a little bit, pretty soon your brain will begin to get the right idea and do the same thing automatically with all your other memories. When you learn how to associate or dissociate consciously, you then have a profound way of changing your life experience.
Dissociation is an especially useful process for taking the sting out of your really unpleasant memories, the ones that produce fear. NLP co-developer Richard Bandler developed a very fast and powerful technique for helping people remove fears, especially difficult fears like phobias, very quickly. It's called the fast phobia technique.
And we'd like to give you an example of how to utilize that technique now. Our bet is, even with the little bit of description we've given you thus far, that you'll be able to figure out just why it works. What's best about this technique is that it works to remove your fear permanently.
When we initially learned this method, one of the first people that we worked with was an insurance salesman who had a fear of elevators. If a client was above the 3rd or 4th floor, he had to take the stairs or avoid visiting them altogether. This fear really limited his income. We asked him where he got that fear, and he didn't have a clue. He couldn't recall the first time, but said as far as he knew, he'd been afraid of elevators his entire life. He could recall as a child being afraid to go up to the dentist's office on the 7th floor of a building and having to walk all the way up. On one visit, his older sister made him ride the elevator up to the dentist's office with her. He still shuddered when he thought about it.
To help him overcome his fear, we had him imagine that he could see himself on the elevator going up. He could picture that 7-year-old boy going up in the elevator filled with terror and panic, as though he were watching the scene from a distance. We had him watch it in black and white, so it seemed even less real and more detached to him. In addition to seeing himself in the elevator, we let him know that it was very important that he hear that little boy crying and carrying on in the picture as well. We also made sure that his internal dialogue was appropriate for detachment, for dissociation. We had him say, "He's frightened over there," and "that little boy is frightened." After he watched himself go up in the elevator and then get off and know he was safe again, we had him associate into the situation in a special way. We had him jump into the scene as opposed to watching himself be in the scene. He was to jump into the scene at the end, after it was over, and go through the same experience backwards, from the end to the beginning. So he popped out at the beginning before the event ever occurred. He did this in full color, and he did it very quickly, in about 1 1/2 seconds. From the end back to the beginning.
Reliving the experience backwards quickly changes the order of the experience around in your brain in such a way that the fear is actually eliminated. You just can't have the fear anymore. It's as if doing this process in your mind pulls the fear from the situation. What we mean by being in the situation backwards is that you actually jump into the ending and imagine that you're doing everything backwards. Walking backwards, talking backwards, moving backwards, doing the entire process backwards. The elevator is going down instead of up, and you end up at the beginning of the experience before it occurred.
Sometimes we have people actually practice moving backwards before we have them do the technique, so that we're sure they know what to do.
The man with the elevator phobia is still doing fine after 6 years. We tested his fear right after doing the technique by riding a glass elevator to a 13th floor restaurant where he enjoyed a glass of Celebration wine.
The same technique can work on a trauma. We were once talking to a man who had a particularly nasty life experience. He'd gone home early from work one day to share with his wife the exciting news that he'd just gotten a promotion that he didn't expect. When he got home, he walked into his backyard, where he knew his wife would be gardening. Tragically, he found her dead. She had died of a heart attack at the age of 35. This scene had powerfully remained with him. Whenever he thought of her or the 10 years of marriage that he had had with her, he would vividly picture his wife lying in the backyard, and he'd relive the shock of the experience all over again.
To help him change the nature of this traumatic experience, we had him watch the same experience as though he was watching it from 100 feet up in the air. He literally saw himself walk into his backyard and find his wife. He saw himself sit down, put his face in his hands, and sit for a few minutes. He had the beginning picture of himself walking up the street, and he had the ending picture of himself sitting with his face in his hands. We had him jump into the movie. Imagine he was sitting for a second with his face in his hands and then get sucked back through the trauma in 1 1/2 seconds, just like he was being pulled back by a giant vacuum cleaner. Having experienced this backwards had the effect of unpairing the fear from the memory, and he began to be able to remember his life with her more easily. We then had him associate into the many pleasant memories he could recall with his wife.
It's important to note that the same technique works exquisitely on post-traumatic stress disorders, such as the type that many of the Vietnam veterans and police officers face. The technique is primarily designed for any situation where there is a strong fear or painful experience such as a phobia. Anytime you have an intense fear of something in the world, it can be called a phobia.
You could have a phobia about riding in elevators or seeing spiders. You could have a phobia of driving on the freeway or of riding in airplanes. So anytime you have an intense fear about something, this process can be very useful.
There are 2 things to keep in mind when you have any kind of fear. First of all, some people with phobias think there's something wrong with them, that they're crazy or it's stupid to have the fear. Actually, if you have a phobic response to something, it means your brain can learn very quickly. Phobias are typically the result of a one-time learning experience.
For example, we heard about a woman who had a snake phobia. The snake had been thrown at her by some kids when she was a little girl. Somehow, outside of her consciousness, whenever she saw a snake or thought about one, she would imagine that dangerous and frightening snake flying at her through the air. That one experience had created a fear that had lasted for over 20 years. She never forgot to get scared when she saw a snake.
This was powerful evidence of her ability to learn, especially after experiencing something only one time.
The second important thing to remember is that the fear is a communication from your unconscious mind. Your unconscious mind is attempting to communicate to you that danger is present and that you need to be careful.
We want to now take a moment and have you explicitly go through each of the steps. You'll be able to change a fearful experience into a flat, detached memory. If you're driving a car or operating machinery that requires your attention, do not actively practice the technique. Set aside a time when you can give your full attention to the process.
Only use this method on situations, memories, or events where you want to eliminate strong negative feelings. Do not use this technique on pleasant experiences. You'll take the fun out of life.
Now let's do the technique. Take a minute and think of something that you're afraid of. It could be making a cold call, giving a speech in public, or it might even be a phobia, such as the fear of driving a car or flying in an airplane. Take a minute and think of what you're afraid of, just enough to get a little bit of the feeling. You want to be sure that you can get access to the part of you that creates the fear.
Now, in your mind's eye, imagine you're sitting in a movie theater. See yourself up on the screen in a still picture just before you had the fearful response for the first time.
If you can't think of the first time, Think of any time that you did have the fear response in that particular situation.
Sitting in the movie theater, we'd like you to look up at the screen and see a black and white still picture of yourself right before the frightening event actually occurred.
Now imagine that part of you floats out of your body, up behind you, and goes into the projection booth, so that you can now look out and see yourself watching yourself on the screen. If this is a height phobia, instead of going up into the projection booth, just imagine you move back a few rows behind yourself, so you're looking over your own shoulder at the screen. As you watch yourself watching yourself, begin to run a black and white movie of what actually occurred and see yourself going through that traumatic experience. Be sure to watch yourself watching yourself go through that experience. You can do it quickly. Rapidly get to the end. You want to get to the end of the situation when the trauma was over. You might still have felt shaky or in pain after the event, but you can tell from your movie that you're safe. The trauma's over with and the frightening part's gone.
Now, create a still picture of the you that you were after the trauma was over with. In a moment, we're going to ask you to jump in and go through the experience backwards, just like you were being sucked back through it by a giant vacuum cleaner. Imagine doing it all backwards, and you want to do it very quickly in 1 1/2 seconds.
That's about this long. Bzzz.
Okay, jump in and do it backwards now. That's right.
Now that you've done it, actually get up and move your body around. Shake your arms and take a deep breath. Now, think of the experience again. If the fear registered a 10 on a scale of 1 to 10 before doing the technique, what would it be now? If it's more than a 2, repeat the same process by jumping into the end and running back through the experience to the beginning. You will find the experience is substantially changed. It's important to gently test the change you've just created. For example, if your fear was of heights, you might go to a fairly high place, look out a window, and notice how your fear has changed.
Test yourself gently and carefully with respect for your own personal safety. Use appropriate caution in dangerous situations. Most people have a hard time believing that you can change a fearful response that quickly. The thing that's important to recognize is that you cannot change slowly. Your brain learns very quickly. The brain learns by having patterns go by rapidly. If you watched one frame of a movie every day for 5 years, would you get the plot?
Of course you wouldn't. You only get the meaning of a movie if all those pictures go by really fast. Trying to change something slowly is like having a conversation at the rate of 1 word a day.
People often ask, how often do I need to practice this process to make it work?
Once you've done this process, you should never need to practice it. Again, it's a learning process. You learn to have your phobia very quickly, and you're learning to change it very quickly as well. So far, we've explored 2 thinking perspectives, association and dissociation, and found that by utilizing dissociation appropriately, you can create impressive change in your life.
There is another perspective that you can add that can greatly increase both your personal effectiveness and the wisdom with which you approach your world. To describe this, we're going to relabel and rethink being associated or being dissociated and add another point of view, yet another perspective.
Being associated can be thought of as being in first position. In other words, it's like you're in the first person. You're experiencing things through your own eyes, in your own physiology, thinking about things with your own values and through your own mental filters. First position is one perspective on the world.
Second position is a different kind of perspective. It's the point of view you adopt when you step into the shoes of another person and experience something through their eyes, their filters, their personal history, and their physiology. When we ask someone to look at something through our eyes, we're making a request of them to take second position, our position, on a particular issue, and try it out through our point of view.
To get a clearer idea of second position, think back to a time when you were in a movie theater, watching a film on the screen, a time when you really adopted a character's feelings. For example, if someone was being chased, you had all the sensation of being pursued. Your hands were sweaty and your heart was racing. Yet you were sitting safely in the theater. That's truly taking second position.
Certain really effective actors are known for their ability to create this rich sense of empathy, to step into the shoes of their characters and really become those people.
When you take second position, you get new and useful information about any particular issue.
Third position is a little like dissociation. You watch yourself. It's a neutral, detached point of view. The difference between third position and dissociation is your timing. You go into third position after you have taken first and second position. This allows you to consider a situation in an objective way, using the information you gathered from first and second positions.
When we teach conflict resolution, negotiation skills, or customer service skills, or as we help organizations build effective teams, we almost always teach people how to consciously move between first, second, and third position. It empowers people to plan and act with wisdom and self-confidence in relation to others. Think of an abusive or autocratic boss that you might have had at some time in your past. Wasn't that person stuck making decisions from only their own first position? You can probably think of many more examples.
The ability to take a total first, second, or third position may be rare in our world.